Tom Joad. This is, of course, a story about politics and about tradition, but it's also a story about the line between fact and fiction, and how often that line melts and disappears. Let me start with an illustration about another fictional character, Rocky, the scrappy boxer from my hometown of Philadelphia. Not long ago, I had my class watch Rocky 1, and one of my students told me a story about his mom. He said that when he was in high school and playing football, his mom would urge him to get up and run or go to the gym. He would shrug and flip another channel on the television, and she would ask him, what would Rocky do now? In a sense, right, Rocky was real to his mom, real enough to serve as a judge for the behavior of her son and others. Now to the 1930s. For many, the Steinbeck character Tom Joad was also real, and Woody Guthrie was his embodiment. Guthrie, as I want to point out this afternoon, was an active participant in the making of this connection. Throughout his career, Guthrie made himself more real and thus more compelling by making himself look more like the fictional character Tom Joad. It's that story of the erasing of the line between fact and fiction, and the resulting legitimization for Woody Guthrie and for those who followed his spirit that I want to talk about for the next few minutes. Tom Joad began as a nameless, non-fictional character. His creator, John Steinbeck, was, of course, a child of the Central Valley, the epicenter of America's agribusiness in the last century and beyond. Steinbeck never strayed very far from his hometown of Salinas, and neither did his best work. Fresh off the successes of Mice and Men and In Dubious Battles, Steinbeck was asked in the middle of the 1930s to write about the agricultural crisis taking shape in the farm fields near his hometown. He got the story by doing what we might call today immersion journalism. He went to the Hoovervilles and relief centers. As he did his research, he reminded himself, and this is a quote that he wrote in his diary, quote, must take time in the description. Detail, looks, clothes, gestures. We have to know these people, know their look and their nature, end quote. Out of this research, he produced a 7-part series of newspaper articles he called The Harvest of Gypsies. This detailed treatment of the Okies, the migrant untouchables of their day at the hands of the growers, was Steinbeck's first, sustained take on the Great Depression. In his view, the growers were squeezing the people and making their lives a living hell. This series garnered a great deal of attention and added to Steinbeck's fame. This fame suggests something important about the broader culture of the Great Depression, something that's invoked whenever Joad or Guthrie are invoked. The historian Jeff Cowie has talked about how economic justice were, in his words, thick in the air in the 1930s. This led to what I would call the cultural enfranchisement of working people. In other words, during the 1930s, the larger popular culture in the U.S. paid attention to the poor and their struggles. They saw them as central to their nation. Steinbeck, of course, both as a fictional and non-fiction writer, was one of the leading voices in this artistic and political move. A move that would help bring Guthrie to light in his time and later. Steinbeck declared in a 1952 interview, quote, when I wrote The Grapes of Wrath, I was filled with anger at people who were doing injustice to other people, end quote. What Steinbeck witnessed in his newspaper research had a profound effect on him and on The Grapes of Wrath. These feelings, along with the novel's documentary details, gave it a specific human context, a felt emotional qualities, and a dramatic dimension that his earlier work lacked. But it was Tom Joad, his anger, and his empathy that in many ways have made the novel endure. Like so many other American heroes, Tom Joad, the main character of The Grapes of Wrath, starts out as an outlaw. In the book's opening scene, you probably remember, he returns from prison. There's a meanness and a danger, a kind of aura to Tom Joad. He's ready to do battle. Against what? It isn't clear at first. As the novel takes shape, so does the focus of his rage. He begins to direct his wrath at the people who were destroying his family, and the not-so-faceless bankers and businessmen that tear apart his community back in Oklahoma. As he moves west, his ire is directed at the labor recruiters and growers who exploit his family and hasten its collapse. This points to one of the novel's main themes, one of the legacies of Tom Joad: the idea and possibility of conversion, change, and moving beyond individualism and individual rage. Like so many other American stories, The Grapes of Wrath is an inversion of the Odyssey. This is not an epic story about going home, but about leaving. Steinbeck centers the Joad's journey in search for better days on the frontier and on California. For him and tens of thousands of others in the 20th century, this is the modern American promised land, the westerly end of the continent, the place for second chances where redemption is possible. But it's also the cruelest of American places, a place of brutal social Darwinian struggle where the mighty run roughshod over the many in the glare of celebrity and unending sunshine. Out of that disappointment, a disappointment, importantly, not in himself, but in the nation, Joad's anger wells up again. He becomes a kind of Depression-era everyman. As Tom confronts California's shortcomings, he converts to a social gospel, as Phillips hinted at earlier, introduced to him by the itinerant preacher Jim Casey. Though Joad never loses his capacity for violence, he moves with Casey away from individualism to a larger collective vision, the idea of connectedness as the solutions to the problem of the Great Depression. Tom Joad, of course, delivers his invocation of the idea of the collective spirit of America in his final speech. He tells his mom, "Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating a guy, I'll be there. I'll be there in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be there in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and know supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise in the houses they build, why, I'll be there." Shortly after the publication of The Grapes of Wrath, John Ford, of course, directed a film version, played with simple grace and smoldering anger by Henry Fonda. Ford's Joad follows Steinbeck's west along Route 66 to California. By the end, he too gives voice to a vague dream of American community. He says in the film's stirring penultimate moment that everyone is part of one big whole, and that if one person suffers, everyone suffers. So here's where Woody Guthrie enters the story. Not long after the film premiered, Guthrie went to New York to play a benefit concert for the John Steinbeck Committee for Agricultural Workers. With Gotham's literary left packed into the audience, Guthrie sang his usual mixture of ballads and traditional songs, accompanied on this night by Leadbelly and Aunt Molly Jackson. After the concert, again not surprisingly, Guthrie was not ready to call it a night. He grabbed his friend Pete Seeger, telling him that the Victor people, quote, "want me to write a song about the Grapes of Wrath," end quote. Guthrie wanted to get started right away. He got himself some wine and a typewriter, his favorite writing tools, and holed himself up in a Lower East Side apartment. Without notes, he typed verse after verse. Seeger dozed off as Guthrie walked in circles playing chords and singing in a muffled voice. When Seeger woke up the next morning, he found Guthrie asleep on the floor, the wine jug empty, and 17 verses of Tom Joad still in the typewriter. Guthrie was proud of his new song.